Wonderful to be here with all of you again. And I'm just hoping that some of the practices we have discussed previously are working for you, or at least that you've had some time to play with them a little bit in terms of your formal meditations and in terms of the daily application, where we just bring in a particular perception, a particular attitude, a particular thought into our mental activity. And then we try to maintain that while interacting with ourselves, with others, with the world in general. And it's this combination of two elements that forms the foundation of Lojong training. We do formal meditations when it comes to Lojong, that's for sure. And in particular, quite a few of those meditations would be centered around the uh, principles of method, as it's known, which includes loving kindness, compassion, altruism, and so forth, even bliss on occasion, and of wisdom. And that includes every type of clear saying that we can gradually cultivate. So some Lojong texts would emphasize wisdom in general, the entirety of wisdom as seen in Buddhism, and that includes the wisdom that sees the selflessness and the emptiness of all phenomena, or the true nature of the mind. But some texts would emphasize a particular aspect of wisdom that's helpful for us to have a healthy attitude to a particular situation or a particular set of phenomena. So there would be formal meditation centered around that, but on top of that, there would be this informal aspect of practice, which is important in Buddhism and in Buddhist training in general, but is especially crucial when it comes to lodging, and that's just maintaining a specific attitude throughout the day, coming back to a specific attitude again and again throughout the day in many different ways. Just reminding ourselves in the midst of a particular situation, oh, hey, I was planning to see it through this particular lens. For example, when it comes to the 8 verses of mind training, which was the text we started covering last time, the first verse has to do with our perception of sentient beings as being particularly precious uh, due to multiple reasons. And so the idea there is that throughout the day, we remind ourselves, hey, I'm supposed to see all beings around me, including these fruit flies and, of course, also these humans around me and my cat and whatnot, all of the beings, not just one, but all of them, as if they were sort of glowing from their own side with this preciousness. And so we extend this attitude of genuine appreciation to them uh, just because they exist, just because they are there for us to eventually also embrace with our loving kindness and compassion. And so just recalling that is the informal aspect of our training. And then on top of that, the third one that I would really recommend as an additional component, it was not necessarily used historically, but it is quite helpful. This third component is our journaling practice. So, taking moments to play with the ideas that we are discussing and the ideas that we see in the texts and the ideas that we see in commentaries, and playing with these ideas, yes, maybe from an intellectual point of view as well, to see whether they make sense to us currently, but not getting stuck in a particular understanding, leaving space for reinterpretation and a deepening of our understanding eventually. So that could be a part of it, but on a deeper level, going from just this merely conceptual exploration to seeing how it feels in our journaling, using journaling to see how we feel about a specific thing and to see whether a specific thing is working for us already, whether it is easy to see beings as being particularly precious, or playing with the whole idea to see how a being that's already mastered this would feel. So the same can be applied for every single type of training that we are playing with, discussing, exploring. For example, when it comes to the four uh, partings and that was our first text, parting from the four attachments. Each line is a specific mental transformation, is a specific type of mind bending, and a specific shift in attitude. So thinking, for example, about the third line, which says that as long as there's self-interest, that's not bodhicitta, we could imagine, well, we could consider, well, what would it be like to have bodhicitta and to not have self-interest and yet to be a fully functional being that is, in fact, maybe even more functional than most of us in terms of having incredible clarity, having incredible love and compassion, and yet still being able to properly take care of our body and mind when necessary. So playing with those ideas and then trying it on mentally, trying to see how we would feel, how we ourselves would feel in a situation of that nature or in a mental state of that nature. So just lots of space there for these types of things. And so a journaling practice, a solid journaling practice can be a wonderful companion for these types of things. But we'd also have our formal meditations, and we'd at least try to do some meditation every day, ideally. That would be great. And so right now we'll do a little bit of that just to establish positive motivation, to relax our body and mind first, then to establish a positive motivation. And then on the basis of that, to play with the first of the 8 verses from Langri Tangpa's text. So please find a comfortable stationary position. Once again, it's perfectly fine to enter a little bubble of practice by turning the camera on, turning the camera off, sorry, or to keep your camera on if that feels better. And if you want to share your presence with others, that's also an act of generosity. So, choosing a comfortable position that works for us, adopting it, and then spending some moments with the body, bringing our awareness into the depths of the body, connecting to the ground that's holding us. And if we wish, even mentally touching the earth in appreciation of our connection to this vast field of interdependence. And then inviting the qualities of earth into our body. The element of earth, which in this case helps us release the tension and settle down in stillness. Noticing the sensations and releasing all the tension from our feet and toes, and then our legs in general. Our pelvic floor, our torso, our shoulders, upper arms, forearms, hands and fingers, and finally our face. spending some time with the entirety of the body, allowing it to breathe naturally, noticing the waves of breathing as they move through our body with each inhalation and exhalation. Then allowing our body to continue resting and maybe even deepening its experience of relaxation, combined with stillness and vigilance, while our mind explores its own motivation for being here. So we check our intentions, we explore our initial intentions, and then eventually we transform them or expand them by adding the elements of profundity and vastness, aspiring for the deepest type of well-being, and for this well-being to become accessible to as many sentient beings as possible. Ideally, all. And if we wish to form the motivation of bodhicitta, that implies, that entails a wish to fully uncover our amazing potential for the benefit of all sentient beings, a wish to fully wake up and become fully lucid so that we can be of greatest possible benefit to all who live. And so for a little while we can rest in this intention and this aspiration, strengthening it with each new natural exhalation. And then to play with the first of the 8 verses offered by Geshe Langri Tangpa, we play with the idea of seeing all sentient beings as precious. First, perhaps imagining that type of perception. For someone who's already realized bodhicitta, for a fully developed bodhisattva, we could say all sentient beings are precious and serve as objects of care. We ourselves are not excluded from this field of care because we are also a sentient being, but we're just one being out of many. And so we can imagine what would it be like to genuinely care about all beings, seeing them as precious, as objects of loving kindness and compassion, and also generosity and patience and so forth. And keeping our mind open towards all, while on the level of our behavior, always choosing what's most appropriate, what's most skillful. That would mean that we never see sentient beings as functions, or, to put it more bluntly, even mere objects of furniture. We see them as precious in their own ability to feel, to desire, to aspire, to move towards something greater, bigger. An aspect of that perception can be connected to the idea of Buddha nature. It can be our ability to see that all beings are endowed with this amazing potential for full awakening, for goodness, for wisdom and compassion. But in Langri Tangpa's logic, there's also an element of recognition of the benefit that we ourselves receive from sentient beings on our spiritual path. Because sentient beings exist, we can develop loving kindness and compassion towards them. On the basis of that, we can generate bodhicitta, and that is a quintessential cause for our own eventual awakening. We can't uncover our amazing potential without bodhicitta, loving kindness, and compassion. So sentient beings are also precious in that without their kindness, which in this case just means their existence, we would not be able to uncover our own potential for goodness. Only in reliance upon them can the totality of our inner radiance be uncovered. And so, how precious they are, therefore. For a little while, we can extend this attitude mentally to those around us physically, to those connected to us socially. And then eventually to all beings, suspending our judgmental, limited perception for a little while and seeing the world through the eyes of a bodhisattva. Eventually, we release it all to just rest in clarity and openness without a reference point. We'll then come back to our body to ground ourselves there. We dedicate the energy of our practice to the awakening for all beings and also to our own eventual success in the practices of Lojong, if we wish. And then we slowly conclude by introducing some movement to the body, rocking back and forth, reactivating our facial muscles, moving our fingers, opening our eyes and gradually transitioning back to our physical space first and then to our shared online space as well. Thank you. So, going back to our slides and in particular to the text of the of the 8 verses of mind training. Um, in fact, before that, wanted to just mention a tiny sort of historical detail related to parting from the 4 attachments, which was our previous text and a staple of the Sakya tradition, but also a text that's studied across all the traditions as an additional Lojong teachings on occasion, an additional Lojong teaching on occasion, and it's quite widely quoted in the texts of the major Tibetan traditions as well. So this teaching on parting from the 4 attachments is actually, from a historical point of view, the only full Tibetan Buddhist teaching that Father Thomas Merton received in his life. Interestingly enough, that was fully quoted to him in the last weeks of his life when he was meeting the Dalai Lama and the other great contemplatives before his eventual passing in Bangkok. So, if you've heard of Thomas Merton, he was this extremely um, open-minded and uh, well-trained contemplative of the Catholic tradition who, towards the end of his life, got particularly interested in Dzogchen. It was actually considering, as some people say, coming back to India after his visit to Thailand to train in Dzogchen formally without renouncing his Catholic faith. And he is a very important voice in sort of the whole field of interaction between the traditions. Still a major source of influence with regards to engaged Christianity and so the social service aspect of Christianity and so forth. So just a very outstanding figure who also influenced the Dalai Lama a lot, and that the Dalai Lama was very impressed by their meeting and does still refer to Father Merton when talking about the interfaith dialogue. So, and during those last weeks of his life, he kept a journal, which was eventually edited into a book named The Asian Journals of Thomas Merton, which would not be really of interest to probably most of you unless you're a Mertonian scholar or you are interested in this interfaith idea. But in this journal, one of the things he quotes is that he sort of received what he felt was a quoting, of this 4-line text. It was quoted to him by an incredible master by the name of Chogyam Trichin Rinpoche. But Buddhists would say that it was kind of like probably an oral transmission of the text from a from a true authentic holder of that lineage. And so actually, why I'm even referring to that, apart from, oh, well, interesting historical anecdote, interesting to some, at least to those who have heard of Merton or maybe read him and so forth. Well, one reason for why I'm quoting that is that that very same master, Chogyam Trichin Rinpoche, um, has a wonderful book on parting from the 4 attachments, and it's a full, extensive commentary on that teaching. So I'll add it to our resource page, and you can, if you wish to explore that teaching more deeply, eventually read the book and even use it as guide so sort of guidance in your exploration of that particular teaching. There are obviously also many wonderful commentaries on the 8 verses of mind training, and some of those are already included in our resource list, and I will be adding more. And for me personally, this text was particularly um, was highlighted in a particularly strong manner in the teachings of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. In particular, the first time I attended his teachings in Dharamsala in 2010, and then in the subsequent times, he would very often come back to this text, give an oral transmission for it, and quote it as a text he really recommends for daily recitation, daily contemplation, and daily application. And so, in one of the books that I recommend for the course, which is now published as an introduction to Buddhism by the Dalai Lama, it used to be called Mind Training, or Mind Transformation or Thought Transformation, something like that. They changed the title slightly because it does also serve as a wonderful introduction to Buddhism. That text includes a full commentary and also the Dalai Lama's personal reflections on the importance of this teaching and how essentially his reflections on how easy and wonderful it would be to apply it. So this is what we're going to focus on now, these 8 shifts in perception that we can gradually perform through using this text on a regular basis. So just to come back to the general practical considerations here, one thing that I do recommend is, yes, eventually studying more extensive commentaries on it. Just as a reminder, I do not serve as a teacher in any way. I'm just here as the worst student in class who was tasked with preparing these slides and showing them. And I did my best, but who knows if there's any benefit or any inspiration in it. But there will be inspiration if you do connect to perhaps the genuine teachings on this stuff. And so there's many wonderful examples of such teachings published in the form of books and so forth, but also available as essentially recorded teachings that even in a way serve as an opportunity to receive a transmission that kind of opens up the as Buddhists would say, the gateways of blessings for us. And so one teaching in particular is from one of my own primary mentors, a great female Lama by the name of Khandro Tsaringma Rinpoche, also known as Kungabuma Rinpoche. Sometimes just call her Khandro. Some people just call her Khandro La, which is just a venerable Dakini. But the more extensive title that I use mostly is Khandro Tsaringma Rinpoche, and she's obviously, yes, a lineage holder of the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, and it is also fairly obvious that there are not that many female Rinpoches yet. There are many incredible female practitioners, but due to patriarchy, not all of them enjoy the appropriate level of recognition and equal opportunities to share the Dharma, and that's changing, but there's still an incredible amount of work to do in that regard. And so Khandro Tsaringma Rinpoche has received incredible support from His Holiness the Dalai Lama, many teachings from His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and in fact, she holds the lineage of the doctrine teachings of the Dalai Lamas, in particular the 5th Dalai Lama. So there's a recording of her teaching on the 8 verses of mind training in Vienna. It's a long teaching. You don't have to watch it in one sitting. And in fact, if you watch a teaching like that, it is good to come back to that recording again and again, sort of just turning it into an audiobook that you re-listen to again and again. That leaves more profound imprints and allows for deeper understanding to arise. So that is coming from a genuine practitioner, not simply a lineage holder, with all the formal aspects of that, but a genuine practitioner of the Bodhisattva teaching, someone who has actual experience. Whereas I'm just saying nonsense, not related to any qualities, experience, knowledge, or anything like that. So that's valid and valuable in that regard for that reason. So one aspect, once again, is study, right? So you listen to these oral commentaries or you read the books. That's an introduction to it all. And by revisiting video teachings, books, and so forth, you are constantly readjusting your understanding to make sure it never deviates too much from the original meaning of these verses. Because when we read these verses and we apply the coordinate system that we habitually have in our culture, or in our personal life, there's always a risk of misinterpretation. Not only there's a risk of misinterpretation, it is 100% sure that we will misinterpret this stuff habitually, just because our understanding of even the most foundational words used in this text, our understanding is very different from the original understanding that such masters as Langri Tangpa had, but also from the understanding that the translators of these texts had when they were working on them 20, 30 years ago. The meaning of a simple word like attachment or concentration or attention in Buddhism and sort of in general colloquial English, then this understanding can be vastly different. So by revisiting the commentaries, we're constantly realigning our understanding and deepening our understanding of the meanings that are used in these systems of practice. So that's one thing. Then the next thing is our reflection. And this is where we can use journaling practices, amongst other things, but also we can discuss this material with each other. And we can just do contemplation in general, reflection in general, when we're taking a walk and just deeply thinking about these things, allowing ourselves to actually think and not simply to endlessly listen to podcasts, but without any engagement from our side. No, we actually think, we give it time and space. And also, we can do all sorts of other reflection like activities, doodling on a specific topic, building mental maps, giving examples from our own life, once again, in journaling or just in thinking out loud or in thinking mentally, all sorts of reflection exercises, whatever works for us. But journaling is a good start actually in this day and age, because it also brings us back to the written word, which is very valuable as we're losing our connection to it. So there's that. Reflect on it deeply, and we, through that reflection, try to make this material come alive for ourselves. And then we do two types of meditation, formal and informal. For some of the verses, the formal component would almost not be present. There would just be not much to meditate on formally, but the informal component would be very strongly pronounced. And for some verses, both would be very strongly necessary. We would be invited to do formal meditation, setting a timer or listening to a guided meditation that is aligned with the meaning of a particular verse. And then informally, once again, what is informal practice? It is us coming back to the specific theme again and again throughout the day when we're doing something else, when we're engaged in some quote unquote normal activity, such as visiting the bathroom, moving around, using public transportation, talking to people, all of that, whatever it is that we're doing, cooking, slicing vegetables, whatever it is that we're doing, for most activities, at least those that do not involve driving or performing surgeries on people. For most activities, there's a little bit of time and space, usually, for us to come back to these important practice-related themes. For us to, for example, infuse everything that we do with compassion or loving kindness or wisdom or concentration and so forth. And so that's what we do, come back to these themes for just a few seconds here and there. And with the first verse, as we have just established in the meditation that we did, we come back to this idea that sentient beings can be seen as precious. So let's revisit the verse itself. Once again, this is a translation by Lama Zopa Rinpoche, and actually an updated translation by him. For many years, there was a slightly different version. And that's the one I remember quite vividly. And then I think in 2019, maybe, or something, he upgraded it or updated it, changed it a little bit. So it is a little bit unfamiliar to me, to be honest, because I'm used to the older one. But once again, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, who passed away in 2023, was um, an incredible example of a practitioner of Lojong teachings, an incredible example of someone who put Lojong at the very heart of his practice. He was also a great master of tantric teachings, and actually highly realized tantric yogi. He was said by many people and many contemporaries to never sleep or to not need to sleep in the way that normal humans sleep. So a very, very profound practitioner. And in fact, Khandro Ringma Rinpoche, who I just talked about, she said on one occasion that Lama Zopa Rinpoche was spending most of his time resting in the clear light nature of the mind, meaning in the deepest level of awareness. He was mostly dwelling there, and sort of to teach and to interact with others. He was coming out of that extremely profound level to offer advice, to offer teachings, and so forth. Uh, so, because of that, his teachings would usually be quite slow paced, and that would annoy some people, Westerners in particular, who were expecting, very rapid succession of ideas and fast pace and also jokes and all of those sorts of things. So in the early days when Zopa Rinpoche was teaching the first kind of generation of Westerners that came to Asia in the 1970s, he would be offering these teachings and at a really at a glacial pace in some occasion, and repeating himself a lot just to get his point across more deeply and so forth, coughing a lot also. And the Westerners coming to Nepal would get kind of annoyed. They were like, oh, not this again. Why is it proceeding so slowly? Is he repeating himself so much? And so Lama Zopa Rinpoche's own teacher, Lama Thupten Yeshe, who was also a highly realized contemplative, on one occasion, just looked at those Westerners and said, if only you knew how low does he have to descend to be able to communicate with you. So meaning from the clear light mind in which he's resting, how low does he have to come down to this level of awareness that he has to descend into to be able to offer teachings to you instead of just vibing there. If you only knew kind of the distance he has to travel to offer you these bits of advice, you would really, really have the most profound appreciation for it. And so eventually people actually did start developing that. And because of that, the mandala of Zopa Rinpoche's students was extremely vast, and he benefited a lot of people. And actually, my first introduction to Lojong teachings was also through him, and in particular through his book on transforming suffering into the path, which I will briefly discuss later in the course. But why I'm quoting that is that, so this translation comes from Zopa Rinpoche, who was himself an embodiment of these teachings, and he also has many, many wonderful texts and ideas on Lojong. And amongst other things, as I mentioned last time, he compiled a practice which combines the 8 verses with a meditation on the Buddha of compassion, or Avalokiteshvara. And that is an example for Lojong teachings of a practice that could be described as supplementary or supportive. Why would we want to combine these 8 verses with a meditation on the Buddha of compassion, in which we recite Om Mani Padme Hum, the mantra of the Buddha of compassion, and we invite his or theirs transformational blessings and so forth? Why do that? The idea there is to make our mind more flexible and more inspired. So these practices, which involve visualization and mantra recitation and so forth, when used in the context of Lojong, they're used to make our mental energy more flexible and to make our ability to flex that energy stronger. And with that, one then do the actual mind bending, which is the essence of Lojong. In some other contexts, visualizations, mantras, and so forth might become the main part of the practice. If, for example, in certain aspects of Buddhist Tantra, we use visualization, mantra, and wisdom in order to cut through our dualistic grasping and our grasping at impure appearances in particular, so that we can eventually develop a pure vision of reality. So in those teachings, yes, these tools become the primary tools that we use. But in Lojong, they are secondary. Their job is to make our mind more flexible. So that practice is really worth looking at if you are into things like visualization, mantras, and so forth. And if not, also not to worry. The quintessential element here is just to keep changing our attitude to the best of our ability. And initially, it will be difficult. unless we have a very strong familiarity with this already through either past life exposures, Buddhists would say, or through having trained in this life already. And some people actually say when they meet a particular point in the teachings, they say, "Oh, this I can do with greater ease because I've already dealt with it in therapy." So I'm currently teaching a course on the cultivation of philosophical intelligence or existential intelligence through essentially the tools that Buddhism developed. And we were in that course recently dealing with the theme of death and impermanence, which obviously should play a large role in our vision of reality because those are facts. Things are impermanent, conditioned things are impermanent, and we will die. So we do need to integrate that into our worldview to a certain degree so that it becomes a bit more complete. And Buddhism offers us tools for integrating that into our worldview through meditation, amongst other things. And so some people in that course were telling me, well, actually, I surprised myself by not having that much trouble with this idea, not having that much resistance to the idea of my own mortality, because I did spend a long time dealing with this in therapy, which I thought was really wonderful. It used to be much more difficult to work with this theme in courses, and some people are actually now finding it much easier because they've dealt with it. And so they have greater openness and actually greater appreciation for this kind of thing. So a similar thing might happen with all the other ideas that we're playing with. Something might already be somewhat familiar. But of course, in terms of our meditation and our daily behavior, there are always deeper levels that we can go towards. And so the best analogy for our own work with these ideas and these practices is that of a spiral. So from when we look from above, it might look as if we're just going in a circle, right? As if we're just repeating the same things, the same practices again and again. And okay, where's the novelty in that? Give me something new. I've been learning about Lojong for a long time. Give me Tantra already or something. Give me Nature of the Mind teachings or something. And the thing is, both Tantra in Buddhism, Buddhist Tantra, which is an incredibly advanced contemplative technology for quickly realizing wisdom, and Nature of the Mind teachings, which is also a subset of Tantra, actually, and another incredibly powerful methodology for developing wisdom quickly. Both of those systems of practice, and they're sometimes described as just one system of practice, both of those really work when we have done our work in terms of Lojong. So Chokyam Rinpoche, one of my primary teachers, and we will look at some of his Lojong texts towards the end of the course. He emphasizes quite often, even though he teaches Nature of the Mind teachings, shares Nature of the Mind teachings all the time, he emphasizes sometimes that Lojong is quintessential as the foundation, and on the basis of that, you can proceed to Tantra, to Mahamudra, to Dzogchen, all these different systems of advanced contemplative training. Without Lojong, there are many people who play with those teachings, really. That's kind of me adding from my own side now. Without Lojong, there are many people who play with these ideas of nature of the mind and Tantra and blah, blah, blah. And it's all very shallow, to be fair, because there's no, even compassion is not yet present. Even loving kindness is not present. Even the recognition of mortality is not yet present. So not much to say, not much we can say about our achievements with regards to these deeper types of wisdom, deeper types of mental transformation. But if we do the foundational work properly, then all these other advanced things come truly alive. And so it starts here, determined to obtain the greatest possible benefit from all sentient beings, who are more precious than a wish-fulfilling jewel. I hold them most dear at all times. I think there's lots to even discuss here. For example, we could sort of, if we did a group discussion, playfully, playing with these ideas, flexing our mind. Even if we took these first two lines and we said, well, isn't that kind of exploitative in terms of how it's worded? Isn't it wrong to be trying to get the greatest possible benefit from all sentient beings? As bodhisattvas, aren't we supposed to relinquish, actually, as aspiring bodhisattvas, aren't we supposed to relinquish our wish to kind of get anything out of sentient beings, replacing the wish to get something out of beings with a wish to benefit them? I think Uh, that's kind of a good way of describing it. The bodhisattva is fully focused on what they can give instead of being focused on what they can get. And when they do get something out of sentient beings, it's simply to reuse it, to repurpose it, to transform it into yet another tool for the benefit of all. So what's with the obtaining the greatest possible benefit? But I think it's just a practical consideration. We are always in touch with sentient beings. Sentient beings do exist, conventionally speaking, in the same way that we exist, conventionally speaking. Um, we ourselves are a dreamlike persona, as we learn in another important Lojong text, the 7-point mind training. We are like an illusory person, and others are also like illusory persons. Um, we are all empty, and yet we are appearing. And so, in this field of appearances, where other sentient beings do appear to us and do interact with us, um, our interactions can lead to something good or to something bad. And a very kind of downward leading spiral, which we can find ourselves in, is that in which we develop greater and greater aversion towards sentient beings and greater attachment to sentient beings. But attachment here means essentially a neurotic desire to possess and to control. And so these two extremes, which don't exist without each other, become our default mode for interacting with beings. Some beings we push away because they're not useful to us or they're harmful to us, and some we try to pull closer to ourselves because they're useful in terms of us fulfilling our needs. And that's, of course, a very kind of I-it relationship. We see them as simply objects. So isn't this idea of getting the greatest possible benefit from all sentient beings also exploitative in the same way? Well, no, because the thing here is that the greatest possible benefit we can get from all sentient beings is a transformation of our mind in which this exploitative attitude, this attitude that wants to control, possess, use, and so forth, is replaced by genuine love, compassion, and bodhicitta. So it's kind of we're replacing the things that we're getting from other sentient beings, the thing that we want to get from other sentient beings with loving kindness, compassion, and bodhicitta. What we want to get from others is them simply serving as a foundation for this wonderful attitudes to flourish in our heart. And they, from their side, don't actually need to do anything for that to happen. Simply through them existing, simply because they exist, they already serve as the foundation for our training. And then the next step is for us to actually do the training, to accumulate those hundreds of hours of loving kindness meditations, compassion meditations, and so forth, which is why it's so important to, at some point, find the time to study the four immeasurables and to practice the four immeasurables deeply. But at least in terms of us having this cooperative condition, um, all sentient beings, we already possess that. And so, in this context, what this verse invites us to do is to see sentient beings as if they were from their own side glowing with preciousness, like jewels, except these jewels walk around, fly around, move around, swim around, depending on what type of bodies they temporarily have. And we can look at them and we can see them through this lens of preciousness. Sort of like this, how you put green glasses in the Emerald City and the Wizard of Oz. Here, a similar idea of looking at sentient beings, but the glasses you're wearing or the eye you're looking through is not your regular eye of grasping attachment and hateful aversion. It's this eye of appreciation, eye of cherishing. You are precious just because you exist. And once again, as I mentioned last time, it is not traditionally mentioned, at least in the Gelugpa commentaries to this stuff. But if we want to weave the idea of Buddha nature into it all, no problem. It's not contradictory. It's just not emphasized very strongly because the Gelug tradition does not very strongly emphasize the Buddha nature theory, whereas Kagyu Nyingma traditions put a great emphasis on it. And so if we were to find um, Kagyu Nyingma commentaries to this teaching, then probably that would be there as well. Thing is, there are some that I've seen, but they were always very abbreviated, not nearly as extensive as the Gelugpa one. So for that reason, perhaps it was underexplored. But I'm sure eventually more material will be translated. We will find more of these commentaries, and yeah, we'll definitely see similar ideas, perhaps. At least that's my guess. But for now, as I mentioned, if we want to integrate the idea of Buddha nature into it, totally fine. There's no logical contradiction there, especially if we actually understand Buddha nature, and that's a whole kind of whole other field of study and practice, very extensive and very elaborate, very beautiful in so many ways, very transformative for those of us who have been raised with these perceptions of original sin and so forth. Very transformative for us to see that Buddhism here offers a very different perspective in which, instead of hearing that fundamentally there's something wrong with us, we're hearing fundamentally there's something right with us. And not only so, from the Kangyu Nyingma perspective, not only is something right with us, everything is right with us on the deepest level. On the surface level, however, we have all this stuff that we need to remove. So lots of dirt has attached itself to the diamond of our being. So we just need to wash it off. No big deal. Just do the practices, do the training. You do need to invest the time, but it's all superficial. It's all on the surface. Once that's removed, the brilliance, the radiance, the spacious luminosity that is at the core of our being, that gets revealed. So a very transformative view of reality. So here for this verse, though, we think, well, every being is an ocean of spacious luminosity. That's the nature of every being. The worms that I am seeing on the road, trying to cross the road, the cat, the dog, and all these big boo-boo political people, even that I have a problem with, conventionally speaking, in terms of my, ability, my attempts to flex my ethical intelligence and say, hey, that's not okay, that's not okay, that's not okay, which is fine and actually important in terms of our interactions with conventional reality. These big boo-boo political people, they also have the spacious luminosity within them. And eventually, maybe a trillion lives from now, they will uncover it. That's the Buddhist working hypothesis as well. So I can still, on the level of working with my ethical intelligence, have all these objections, and I can express those objections through action, uh, whatever actions needs, whatever action is appropriate in the realm of conventional reality. But in terms of appreciating, cherishing all beings, there I can see them all as being illuminated by this inner glow. But also, I appreciate the fact that through the mere fact of their existence, beings serve as the foundation for my own awakening, for my spacious luminosity being uncovered. Because for me to uncover it, I need to develop bodhicitta. To develop bodhicitta, I need loving kindness and compassion. I can't develop loving kindness and compassion if I'm running away mentally or on the level of my heart. And that's the same thing in Buddhism. For all sentient beings, I can only develop loving kindness and compassion by integrating beings into my practice, bringing beings into my practice. So that's just a brief summary of this verse. And you will see more elaborate and more profound and more intelligent explanations of it all, as I've mentioned, in these video teachings and these written commentaries or commentaries compiled as a book on the basis of oral commentaries. Lots of stuff to explore and lots of stuff to play with. So another thing that can be done practically, in addition to reading and journaling and so forth, is something that I think I mentioned previously. You can print out the 8 verses, and then you can cut them into 8 strips. So you have a strip of paper for each of the verses, or a card, or you can obviously write it out yourself using beautiful calligraphy, whatever. And then you keep that one verse in front of you for some time while you're actively working on this verse, and then let's say in 1 week, you switch to the next verse, and then in 1 week you switch to the next verse, and then you circle through them again and again for some time to really dive into this teaching deeply. And that's kind of the spiral principle. From above, it seems like you're just, moving in circles, but actually with each new circle, with each new repetition, you're going more and more and more and more deeply. And that's the beauty of it. Then for the second verse, this is the one that can already be a little bit offensive to the Western mind, let's put it that way. Or this is the verse that does seem to cause some trouble to be a little bit difficult for people with our cultural background. And I'm speaking, of course, in generalizations here. Obviously, there are many of us here, and we would have very different backgrounds, perhaps, and some people might not have that much connection to the westernized, globalized world at all. But a lot of people growing up in the West, and that term here is used loosely, and that includes, in this day and age, even such regions as Singapore and Malaysia and so forth that have been heavily influenced by the global market and so on. Some people would find this verse a little bit difficult to apply. So what does it say? Wherever I am and whoever I am with, I always consider myself the lowest of all, and from the depths of my heart hold others dear and supreme. So when hearing this for the first time, without an explanation, we can immediately go into kind of rejection mode and say, whoa, I've already spent so many years thinking I'm the lowest of all. Thanks, mom, or thanks, society, or thanks, Catholic boarding school teachers or whatever. There's always someone who might have led us to see ourselves as inferior. And then it took me years of therapy to fix that. And now I have sort of a relatively balanced self-perception. So definitely not in the mood to come back to this idea of seeing myself as the lowest of all. Thank you very much. So what's up with that? So these are all very meaningful objections, obviously, and they do make perfect sense. It's just here we do need to understand what's meant as opposed to what we think it means, right? So what we might think it means is that we need to go into this mode of seeing ourselves as really being low quality, having this low quality ego with low quality talents, low quality abilities. And also, on top of that, we sometimes get body perception issues. And we also think that physically we're also not up to the standard, whatever that impossible standard is. So, from all points of view, like, bleh, just why do I even exist? So, that's not at all what's meant here. This verse is obviously meant as an antidote to the attitudes of arrogance or inflated pride, um, and so forth. And arrogance in Buddhism is described as a mental factor, mental function, an aspect of our mind that essentially exaggerates our perception of ourselves while uh, deflating our perception of others. So we inflate the certain aspects of ourselves incorrectly. We misperceive them and think they're bigger than they actually are. And at the same time, in order to inflate our vision of ourselves, we deflate our perception of others. And so we think we're the hottest thing on wheels, we're the greatest thing on wheels, the newest thing on wheels, and others are kind of, ugh, how can they compare to this paragon of incredibleness that I am? So, in many cases, we think that arrogance is this attitude of thinking that we're great and others are not, right? That we're wonderful and others are not as wonderful. But the fun thing is that from a Buddhist point of view, this very same function of arrogance can inflate the negative aspects of ourselves and have us say, oh, I'm the worst sentient being there is. I'm the worst, and others are better. So we can actually, under the influence of arrogance, inflate our perception of something negative in ourselves. And so a common example that does surface in Buddhist teachings a lot in the modern day and age is people saying, well, I can probably accept the fact that beings have Buddha nature. I have doubts about myself, though. I'm not sure if I have it. So I can, yes, maybe consider that all sentient beings have the potential to become awakened, have all these beautiful qualities within them, either as already fully present or as a potential. And these are the two interpretations of Buddha nature. to major ones. But as for me, I don't think I have that. No, I don't think I'm capable of developing this stuff or succeeding in Lojong training or developing concentration or whatever, you know. Everyone else can, it's just not me. And that's still arrogance from the Buddhist point of view. We're still inflating something. We're just inflating the negative. So, you know, there's this kind of also pop psychology idea or kitchen psychology idea, as I would really call it, of um, ex exceedingly high self-esteem always being underpinned by exceedingly low self-esteem, and then underneath that there's another level of unrealistically high self-esteem, and underneath that there's also an unrealistically low self-esteem, you know, and it kind of goes down like that in layers. Essentially, it's a bunch of extremes layered on top of each other, like a layered cake, you know, where you remove this bombastic self-promotional quality that someone might have. Not going to give any political examples, but let's say there is someone who's constantly talking about how great they are, you know, bigly, and then you remove that, and there's incredible sense of self-doubt underneath that, or just a clear recognition that you're not that great, honestly, bigly. And then you remove that, and there's another layer of no, I am great, I'm incredible, you know. And then it kind of just goes on and on and on. And all of those are completely incorrect interpretations from a Buddhist point of view. It's just a bunch of wrong concepts, not related to reality whatsoever. But and then we live like that, you know. So, of course, people who have worked with this in therapy, let's say, or through contemplative practice and so forth, might have reduced this considerably or seen through this considerably. But if not, then a practice of this verse in particular becomes a little bit difficult. So, what is meant here when it says that I always consider myself the lowest of all? This is a description of a perception that needs to remain realistic. Remember, Lojong teachings always invite us to do something that's realistic, but oftentimes this realistic thing that we're starting to do when we're practicing Lojong teachings is different from what we habitually do. So it has to be unconventional, let's say, and yet realistic. It's an unconventional attitude that we're trying to develop to go against the grain of our old habits of grasping, but it also has to remain realistic. So, realistically speaking, saying that we're the lowest of all in general, as in we are the worst sentient beings there is, that's not realistic. We're not the worst sentient being. First of all, we all have Buddha nature in equal measure. So from that point of view, we all have equal potential, the same potential. We all have equal value from that point of view. So it's not like we're less valuable or we have less potential. So it's not that. It's also not realistic to think we are the absolutely worst practitioner and so forth, because even the fact that we have any interest towards spirituality, mental training, you know, the different aspects of inner yogas and so forth, already shows that we have accumulated incredible positive potential in our past lives. That's how Buddhism describes it. We would not even remotely come into contact with anything related to mind training. We would not even remotely have an opportunity to spend time and money exploring all of this stuff if there was not an incredible amount of groundwork done in multiple past lifetimes. And obviously, that kind of puts us in a very advantageous position. So we can't really say that we're the worst practitioner, because even if we're not practicing very deeply right now, we're at least contemplating all of this stuff. We have an aspiration for compassion. Venerable Rubina Cortine one time said in a retreat in Kathmandu that I attended, we think we're creeps, but compared to most people on the planet, we are almost saints. And that's really fascinating, isn't it? We think when we kind of follow the logic of our habitual misperception that we are trashy people. And this is a generalized statement that we make on the basis of seeing our imperfections. And it's totally fine to see our imperfections, but we need to see them within this more balanced view of reality. The thing is, to develop that more balanced view of reality, we do need to train in wisdom. We do need to develop essentially what boils down to systems thinking. or as Buddhists call it, the view of interdependence. So when it comes to our own personality, this view of interdependence means that we see our conventional self as a system, ourselves as conventionally existent sentient beings. We see ourselves as a system. And in a system, there would always be good stuff and bad stuff, helpful stuff and unhelpful stuff. The unhelpful stuff we want to remove, the helpful stuff we want to strengthen or recover. No big deal. When we have the systems view of ourselves, we see ourselves as a field, as a network, as a system. We don't overreact either way. We don't need to feel, we don't need to exaggerate our goodness, and we also don't need to denigrate the aspects that need fixing. The problem is instead of having the systems view, we constantly default to the entity view, the unit view. We constantly think, no, I'm a fixed thing. In a system, there's a billion interconnected things. So you can't really say, oh, it's great or it's horrible. When you're looking at an ecosystem, a forest, let's say, you don't say it's horrible or amazing. There's so much stuff happening there. The best you can say is like, oh, it's kind of declining in terms of its survivability, or it's flourishing and it seems to be doing well, kind of that. But you can say it's horrible or wonderful because, there's so much stuff there. What exactly are you talking about? You don't like this mushroom? Even that is a system in its own, in itself. So when we look at the systems, we don't make these very generalized, very big statements. But when we look at individual entities, we do make those statements. We look at the cup and we say, well, I like it or I don't like it. It's trashy or it's beautiful. The thing is, even a cup is a system, actually. And so the more we develop this systems view through practicing the wisdom of interdependence, the less likely we are to make these very large statements. So that's how we gradually remove both the extremes of essentially self-inflation and self-deflation. But then what does it mean here to hold others dear and supreme and to consider myself the lowest of all? And why would we even want to do that? When it talks about seeing ourselves as lowest of all, it is a tool that it is a skillful attitude that we use in order to counteract this self-inflating attitude that will keep popping up for a long time, where we look at someone working in the same field as us, let's say, or we attend a Buddhist event and we look around, and through habit, through the force of habit, we feel arrogance when compared to others. For example, we come to a Buddhist event is a perfect example that happens all the time to all of us. We come to a Buddhist event and maybe we've been doing this mind training thing, Buddhist thing, yoga thing for a few years, and there's someone new there. Or maybe not even someone new, but they just never, let's say, learned the proper protocol. Or they're still putting their Dharma texts on the floor, which you're not supposed to do in a Tibetan Buddhist context. It's considered to be disrespectful. Or they're chatting loudly, not being mindful enough and quiet enough, or whatever it is. We always find these ridiculous things to feel arrogant about. And then we look at them and we're like, oh, or if we were raised in a family that really appreciated not taking up too much space, we appreciate people's ability to not take up too much space. And when loud people show up in the field of our awareness, people who are being very bold with sharing their views and their presence, we feel arrogant towards them. And maybe they're feeling arrogant towards us because they are not afraid to share what they have to share. And we are like timid mice, unable to open our mouth even when it's necessary. So there's always kind of this arrogance going both ways. There's always something to cling about. So to counteract that, Langri Tanpa is suggesting that we see that in every aspect, in every field, in every discipline, there's always someone that exceeds us. And for every sentient being that we meet, there would always be at least one thing that they're better at than us. So in general, let's say I'm a translator. That's one of my um, jobs for now. Probably will get replaced by AI very, very soon. But for now, for like probably the last couple of years, if not less than that, I'm a translator slash interpreter. There are, objectively speaking, there are translators and interpreters that are much more qualified than me, much more fluent than me, much more eloquent than me, much more concentrated than me, have better memory than me, and so forth. It's just a fact. And within the field of translation itself or interpretation itself, there are different sort of sub qualities or sub disciplines that you have. And so in each one of them, there would be a person on this planet who's better at them than me. Even if I'm the number one person in this specific aspect for some reason, and I'm not, but even if I were to be one, there would always be people who are better at the seven other aspects than me. So there's never, so there's always someone better at every quality. There's always someone further along the path, including the spiritual path, obviously. And even when I meet a particular person and I look at them and and I suddenly start feeling arrogant about a specific thing, I need to remind myself that it's something else they're better than me. I might be more of a translator than someone who's not a translator at all, but they're a better cook, a better person, a better husband, a better wife, a better mother, blah, 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 blah. The list goes on and on and on. I might be better than them in this one thing, and they're better than me in these 60 other things. So just reminding ourselves that by comparison, there's always someone who exceeds us, and every sentient being does surpass us in something, even if we're not aware of that specific thing yet. If we were to analyze very carefully, we would probably discover that in something they're better than me. So it's just a backward move. We move backwards from inflation towards the balanced view. We remind ourselves that in something, every sentient being surpasses us. That's just a logical statement. And it doesn't at all make me less valid, less valuable, less of a sentient being full of amazing potential. The fact that someone is better than me at cooking, it's not a problem. Why would I care? Why would I worry about it? That's the fact that I'm not the best translator in the world. Why would I worry about that? I'm still uniquely able to hopefully offer something of benefit given my unique combination of factors. But I don't need to be the best at anything. I just need to be the best version of myself, like to once again use the language of pop psychology. That's what's important, not me trying to surpass others or to compete and so forth. So we move backwards into a balanced view by saying, in something else, you surpass me. So moving backwards in that. And then from the depths of my heart, hold others dear and supreme. Well, the foundational aspect there is just saying, yes, that all sentient beings are precious. But in particular, here we can focus on the wonderful qualities that we discern in others. So we might feel certain competitiveness arise in us, right, towards another sentient beings or another sentient being, or arrogance. Once again, oh, they're being noisy and we're waiting for Buddhist teaching to start, and I'm being quiet and mindful, blah, blah, blah. So we notice that. We make that backward flip. We think, well, I don't know, they might be infinitely better practitioners than I am. And who knows? And look, they have many friends. They probably have many wonderful qualities that people around them appreciate. So we make that backward move. And then if we are able to discern some good quality in them, see, oh, they are actually very friendly, or they are actually taking care of those around them, and so forth. They are actually very eloquent. We can focus on that with appreciation. I think, wow, wonderful. This person is compassionate. This person is wise. This person is eloquent. This person is caring. This person is funny. And through focusing on qualities, on positive qualities with an attitude of appreciation, we create the conditions for our own similar qualities to eventually expand as well. So this attitude of appreciation, when it's applied to any quality that we're attending to, creates fertile ground for this quality to grow in us. That's actually the main one of the main qualities that are used in many systems of Buddhist practice, but especially in Buddhist Tantra. Buddhist Tantra has a lot of these things a lot of practices in which we imagine, let's say, an embodiment of a particular quality, an embodiment of wisdom, an embodiment of compassion, an embodiment of the ability to heal, and so forth. And these are the different meditational deities in Buddhist Tantra. And I think similar logic is actually used in Hindu Tantra and Jain Tantra as well. But in Buddhist Tantra, we imagine, let's say, the Buddha of compassion, Avalokiteshvara, and we focus on his there's quality because sometimes in some other countries, Avalokiteshvara appears in female forms as well. We focus on Avalokiteshvara's qualities of wisdom and compassion in particular, but also sometimes loving kindness and a bunch of others. And we focus on those qualities with this quality of appreciation, known as Möpa in Tibetan. Uh, we hold it with a sense of appreciation. And why would we want to do that? Amongst other things, we do that so that our own compassion can grow rapidly. Because what grows rapidly is what you appreciate. If you think of compassion as, meh, whatever, it's not likely to grow. And of course, it's not likely to grow if you think compassion is weakness, compassion is horrible, compassion is bad, compassion, is against the teachings of Jesus or whatever. People have all these sorts of ideas. You know, if you think compassion is of value and how wonderful you really rest in this emotionally and conceptually, compassion will grow. So this practice of holding others dear and supreme and seeing also that they do have all these beautiful qualities that stimulates all the types of goodness within us, all the wholesome qualities, all the aspects of goodness within us. And then our own good qualities grow as a result. So amazing. So this is not about seeing ourselves as being poor quality. In fact, in Buddhism, in the Lamrim teachings, which also come from Atisha, and Lamrim teachings are more sequential, more straightforward, and a bit less radical in a way. In the Lamrim teachings, a lot of the work done on the earlier levels of training has to do with building a healthy sense of self, essentially developing a healthy perception of ourselves as a sentient being that's currently endowed with this prescient human rebirth and therefore endowed with so many wonderful opportunities and qualities and things that we have accumulated in the past. So developing that appreciation and then a healthy desire to not waste it. And then on the basis of that, we actually start doing the steps of training proper. All of that is all about building a healthy sense of self. Lojong teachings are more radical. They sometimes take us to more radical points immediately, but we do need to understand them properly. Otherwise, we can read this verse and think, oh, okay, I'm supposed to see myself as the worst of them all. Yeah, it sounds familiar. I've done that before in the past. So, and then either rejection or adoption, but adoption of a thing essentially that we misunderstood. Now, that's not helpful. Verse number 3. In all actions, I examine my mental continuum, and the minute a delusion arises, since it endangers myself and others, I forcibly confront and avert it. So this is about just watching our mental activity through using the qualities of mindfulness and introspection, as they're known in Buddhism. Mindfulness is, in Buddhism, simply the ability to not forget. So non-forgetfulness with regards to previously cognized objects. That's the formal definition of it. And then introspection or vigilance. And these are all just different translations of the original Sanskrit, Pali, and Tibetan terms. Samprajanya is the Sanskrit term for it, is essentially the act of checking what's happening with our body and mind again and again. So every few minutes, every few seconds, every few hours, depending on what is it that we're doing and where, we perform this body and mind scan. We scan very briefly, very promptly. Oh, what's happening with my body and mind? What am I doing? Essentially, what am I doing, or what is my being doing? What are these different constituent parts of my being doing? And so with the body, we can sometimes say, "Oh, look, I was hoping to, keep my back straight, and now it's not straight, so I better fix that." Those things. Or I'm noticing lots of tension in my body. Let me release that. So that's with the body. And then with the mind, we can, in particular, be on the lookout for unwholesome mental states. And this is what's meant by delusions here. So, of course, the term delusion in different language can be used in different ways by different translators. For Zopa Rinpoche, he was using it as his preferred translator term for the Sanskrit concept of klesha, which is also very commonly translated as affliction or even mental distortion. And there are also some other options. Some people say disturbing emotions even, but that one is highly debatable. So I'm personally not using that. But I think affliction is a good mental affliction is a good term. Mental distortion is a very good term. And delusion was the term that Zopa Rinpoche preferred. And what does it refer to? Essentially, all the causes of our suffering in terms of our mental activity are divided into karma and afflictions. And so karma has to do with these compulsions that arise in our mind on the basis of our previous intentions. We have an intention, it leaves an imprint in our mind, and eventually that imprint ripens as a compulsion to do something. And that's how we end up in difficult situations, or positive situations, really. So that's karma. But the deeper cause of suffering from the Buddhist point of view is afflictions, mental distortions, or delusions, klesha, once again in Sanskrit. What are these klesha? These are our afflicted mental states. What are their two properties? What are their two defining characteristics? They give us tunnel vision and they disturb the mind. So they distort our vision of reality. That's characteristic number one. And they make us feel bad. That's characteristic number two. And they're present at the same time, these two characteristics. Whenever our mind, our vision is distorted from the Buddhist point of view, that in itself already feels bad, at least on a deeper level, if we look more deeply. So, what are these mental afflictions? Well, in Buddhist formal psychology, you would have lists of six, and then that gets expanded into many secondary ones and so forth. In the more practice-oriented Buddhist psychology, you have a traditional list of five quintessential mental afflictions or delusions or mental distortions. And then on the basis of that, many, many, many secondary ones appear as these five kind of marry each other and produce babies. So the five primary ones are usually described as ignorance. That's the foundational one, even though it has two levels, two layers to it. Then you have neurotic attachment. You have anger and aversion. Uh, these are two different ways of translating the same term, essentially. Aversion is a more general, universal term, and anger is kind of more limited, but some people understand it better. And then you have arrogance or pride, once again, the one we were previously discussing, and jealousy or envy. Here it means envy. It's more about envy than, let's say, romantic jealousy, even though romantic jealousy obviously can be a part of it. So, ignorance, which is just not knowing reality or misinterpreting reality actively. Then neurotic attachment, which exaggerates the positive qualities of an object and wants to therefore possess the object. Aversion, which exaggerates the negative aspects of an object and therefore wants to push it away or to destroy it. Arrogance, that inflation of something related to ourselves, while at the same time we're deflating stuff related to others. I'm smart, they're stupid, that kind of thing. And then envy, uh, which is essentially a mental function that makes us feel uncomfortable about the well-being of others, the success of others, the victories of others, and so forth. Seeing that others are doing well, that kind of mental screeching that comes up is envy. So these are the five foundational ones that are described in the tantric teachings of Buddhism. Once again, depending on which subset of Buddhist teachings you look at, different combinations of these mental afflictions would be highlighted. Amongst all of these, three are always described as the most important: ignorance, attachment, and aversion. These are described as the three poisons, the most foundational aspects of our ability to be afflicted and deluded. Right? So over time, we can study these lists, and the more we study them, the more we are able to identify these different mental distortions in our mental activity. And then what this verse is telling us is be on the lookout for all of this stuff. Be vigilant with your mind, or be watchful. Another female Rinpoche, Khandro Rinpoche from the Minderling tradition, who's also very, very famous and wonderful teacher. She sometimes talks about watchfulness with regards to our body and mind. And that's kind of almost close to the popular idea of mindfulness. The popular interpretation of mindfulness, which is quite different now from the original Buddhist one, is this essentially attentiveness to the flow of our experience, attentiveness to what's happening in our body and mind, and without too much judgment, without too much interpretation attached to it. So that's kind of the modern day popular mindfulness that you see in such trainings and as MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction, and so forth. So watchfulness, this concept that I'm quoting from Khandro Rinpoche for the Minderling tradition, this watchfulness is a bit similar in that we're being attentive with our body and mind. Except here, this watchfulness also means that once we identify that something is unwholesome, we try to fix it as fast as possible. We apply any of the antidotes that are available to us. And what are those antidotes? Well, their list will eventually expand for us as we're learning more and more practices, more and more techniques. Uh, some of the foundational things that we can do is just to watch the afflicted mental state until it dissolves. Just watching it with curiosity will remove its power in many situations. Another trick that's taught by Shantideva at a very foundational level is just to stay still or not do anything until this afflictive wave passes through us fully. We are noticing that we're under the influence of desirous attachment or this afflicted wish to push something away. And instead of immediately sending that email, immediately responding to that text, immediately running somewhere and doing something, we just rest, we become still, like a block of wood, Shantideva says, or like a tree. Because he talks about wood, but if we don't like the idea of a block of wood, let's just stay still like a tree, just vibing, trees vibe, just chilling there. And eventually that wave of affliction will pass, and that's where we can make a more informed, compassionate, and wise decision. Of course, we don't always have the luxury of staying fully still if the situation is, inviting rapid action, but trying to do that action from a space of clarity and compassion is what's ideal here. And the verse itself is inviting us to be very vigilant with our mental state. So when we're training in it, on a daily basis. Let's say we are starting a week of doing primarily this verse, right? We've played for a couple of weeks with the previous two verses. Now we want to focus on that. What would we do in that week? We would be particularly mindfully aware of the activities of our mind throughout the day. We would regularly check, oh, what is my mind doing? What is my mind doing? What is the state of my mind? As a formal practice that we can attach to this, we can do some meditations on mind as an object. There is a concentration practice, a shamatha practice, in which we watch all the activities of the mind. And through watching the activities of the mind, we develop concentration. That's a brilliant technique that came from India originally, but eventually assumed great importance in the Indo-Tibetan tradition. In the Tibetan tradition, it was practiced very widely by Tibetans. So there's no problem. It's not difficult to find guided meditations related to that, and even whole books devoted to this method, which describe it with great detail. There's a wonderful book by Dr. Alan Wallace. There's a wonderful book by Lama Tupten Yeshe and many, many other texts available on it all. And so Lama Yeshe's book is called Mahamudra, and it goes way beyond just this watching the mind. It goes way beyond, just sent it to the wrong place. It goes well beyond just watching the mind, but still, it does include an exploration of this technique. And for Dr. Alan Wallace, I would recommend starting with his book Genuine Happiness, which does include this technique, but then beyond that, you can explore some of his other texts that unpack this practice in particular. But all of that is to say that type of concentration practice can serve as an additional component to this verse. And the essence of this verse is to be constantly on the lookout for what is happening on our mind. And that kind of brings us to the end of the third verse. And in the next class, well, and that's already something to practice, right? So we started with seeing sentient beings as precious. Now we can work with the kind of moving back from arrogance towards a more balanced systems thinking, systems perception of ourselves and others. And we can practice with keeping awareness of what's happening in our mind. And in terms of what to experiment with in the subsequent week, I would say try this third one in particular. And the second one is, of course, very important, very valuable. But this third one is sometimes described as the quintessence of all Lojong. In the 37 practices of Bodhisattvas, which is another important Lojong text, the verse that covers this kind of presents it as the essence of everything else that's described in the text. Above all, do this. So, because if you don't have this watchfulness with regards to mental activity, none of the other practices will work. In order to succeed in seeing others as supreme and ourselves as quote unquote lowest of all, we do need to be aware of the states of our mind in general. In order to activate compassion and deactivate hatred, we do need to be aware of our states of mind in general. So to try to keep this watchful gaze directed at our mind on a regular basis. And this is where there are actually some additional practical suggestions. For example, in some traditions, they invite beginners to look at the mind 3 times every hour. And we think that's too daring. At least we can try and do that formally 3 times throughout the day or 6 times throughout the day. And each time we do it, we mentally congratulate ourselves. Okay, 1 time, done. 2 times, finished. 3 times, success. So we can choose a number that works for us. 3 times each hour, 3 times per day, 6 times per day, 6 times every hour, whatever works. Uh, Starting with that, training in that, and eventually this will become more easily accessible. And then through that, we will actually have greater rates of success when it comes to other practices. And this is developing this watchfulness and quickly averting the unwholesome mental states. And we will eventually, as we just train in general, not even in this course, but outside of that, we will eventually have a much bigger toolkit for dealing with specific mental states. So, for example, the second verse is an antidote for arrogance. So when we see ourselves getting arrogant, we need to apply what's described here. When we start seeing sentient beings as, once again, merely pieces of furniture, so we kind of we slip into this I-it relationship as opposed to I-thou, we can apply this one, the first verse. And similarly, eventually we develop many, many, many other tools that we can use to forcefully confront and avert it, or as a more general tool, even just looking at the distorted mental state with curiosity, but without strong self-identification. That's a tool. Shifting our mental state into something else. Whatever our afflictive mental state is, if we just switch to wisdom or loving kindness or compassion, also a great tool. So eventually we will learn more of those from different subsets of practice. In Tantra, for example, we're taught how to transform all mental afflictions into bliss and emptiness, or luminosity and emptiness, depending on a specific aspect of practice. So as we gain that, our ability to confront and avert will develop. But it starts with seeing, and that's what we can play with for a week. If at the end of the week you have any questions, please feel free to ask in the chat. And also that's generally true for this course. If you want to ask anything in the chat, please feel free to do so. I'm always happy to comment on something or to offer additional thoughts on the matter. So wishing you a happy week of practice with this stuff. Maybe a happy week of reading and watching also, if some of you want to explore those links and some of those books. And we will see each other in 1 week to continue the 8 verses, to complete them, and then to jump into our next text. So enjoy your week, enjoy your practice, and see you all very soon. Thank you so much.